we've been warning you on this show for, I don't know, months now, that the next step for these globalists is to implement a climate lockdown. Forget COVID lockdowns, because you ain't seen nothing yet. The World Economic Forum and Bill Gates have been pushing this new mission. Coming soon, climate lockdowns, The Hill asks. The mission, of course, is to remove fossil fuels and meat from our diet. They plan to force automakers to do away with combustion engines, force companies to implement long-term work-from-home strategies, get as many people off the roads as possible, keep them at home, Zoom calls, do as much as you can. The way Bill Gates paints the picture, those pesky those COVID lockdowns were just the warm-up act. I mean, think about this for a second. He says they hardly move the needle for climate change, Bill Gates says. Think about how many people were home, how many flights were canceled, how many cars were not on the road, how many trains were halted as a result of it. He says that was peanuts. Don't get too excited about it. Here's Bill Gates. He actually pushed for this new lockdown on his website. He has a post called "COVID-19 is awful. Climate change could be worse," he writes. And he says, and I'll save you from having to read the whole thing like I did. I'll give you some of the highlights. He says, "Sure, COVID was bad, but it was great for the environment."
It wasn't, though. In a study, 49 researchers used 12 models to run 300 simulations of COVID emission reduction. And here's what they found, that they could not detect any associated impact on temperature or rainfall. So it did, in fact, plummet emissions, but it did not actually result in an impact on temperature or rainfall.
So emissions went down, but it did nothing.
Emissions went down, but only for the duration of which people were in lockdowns. And then since, by some measures, like China increased emissions by 4% when lockdowns ended, although I know in some places lockdowns have not ended in China. But very few people would willingly reproduce what we went through in 2020, right? And so emissions actually went back up. But even during those times when researchers modeled that if we reproduced that behavior, it did not actually have any impact on temperature or rainfall.
I mean, someone says, Bill has one hell of a God complex. Someone else in the chat just asked, why isn't Bill Gates in prison yet? Good question.
Well, he did a whole long piece on 60 Minutes about how he loves the environment so much and he's so bullish to invest in things that will help save the planet. And when asked, well, do you not use a private jet? And he goes, no, I do, but I buy offsetting credits. So he's telling us that we need to go back to the anguish that we felt collectively during lockdowns, even though there is no proof yet that it actually worked not to reduce emissions. It did reduce emissions, but that in and of itself didn't actually impact temperature or rainfall. So then should we all just buy more credits? We could use all of his money, buy all the credits, and then we can all do whatever the heck we want. Right.
It reminds me of plenary indulgences, right, in the Catholic Church back in the day. They don't have them anymore. I think it was, I don't know what year you could buy plenary indulgences, right? Catholics, let me know. But you could, basically, rich people could, they could do sinful things, and then they just could buy things and get credits, basically, like carbon offset credits.
It exactly is that.
You could get sin offset credits with the church. That's how it used to work. So back to this Bill Gates piece here. COVID-19 is awful. Climate change could be worse. And he writes, COVID was bad, but it was great for the environment, which Natalie just took the wind out of. He also writes, because poor and middle class people were locked down at home, we reduced our carbon emissions by just 8%. Bill Gates says that's nice, but that's not enough, he writes. He says, basically, we need to 10x our lockdown approach. The only way to do this, that 8% was nothing, we need to 10x it. Of course, it's not surprising then that shortly after that, Bill Gates started pushing these new climate lockdowns on globalists at the World Economic Forum, his favorite buddies, and they started pushing them as well. They all got together. He crafted a book around this idea. Then it wasn't long, of course, before the International Energy Agency, not the Atomic Energy Agency, but the International Energy Agency got on board. The IEA was founded in the 1970s after a big oil spill, and the International Energy Agency demands worldwide lockdowns now to meet climate goals. They want us off of fossil fuels right now. They are demanding a climate lockdown to move us off of fossil fuels.
So if we just live in villages, right, and just walk to the local store, like in Back to the Future 2,
Right.
right, in these sort of like,
Back to the Future 2 or 3?
what's the one with where they're in the Wild West?
That's 3.
Yeah, excuse me.
2 is in the future, when they go to the future.
Yes.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying
Yes.
here. Okay, this reference may be dumb to many of you watching, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So we need to go back to sort of like that type of village living.
Yes.
Is what they want.
We need to go Back to the Future 3.
Okay, but again, I'm going to point out that COVID lockdowns also reduce GDP. And when you reduce GDP, you increase poverty in the poorest regions, which results in lower quality of life for the poorest among us.
Right.
Right. And so what it seems to me is that these globalists don't want an increase in GDP. They don't want to elevate everybody's lifestyle. They don't want a more empowered population.
No, they don't. Of course they don't. They want, again, this is the plan, right? They want poor and middle class to be in total control, right?
Yeah.
Total control, and they led by a group of globalists. That's been the plan all along. They recently
think about it. They got. I was just going to say really quick. They got rid of 200,000 small businesses that were competition for the big box stores. So now the big box stores, they had the lower prices while they were competing with the mom and pops. But now that the mom and pops are all gone, they can charge whatever they want for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, they control everything. They control the entire supply chain. And by the way, when they do these lockdowns, it's not about the rich people. It's not about the Targets and the Amazons and all of that. They get to skirt any kind of laws they want, right? It is the small hair shop. It's the small pet store. It's the small restaurant that gets slammed, right, and gets run out of business. That's exactly what happens.
Well, this is something that's been this started in the 90s. I know I've brought this up on the show before, but it's been a sticking point with me since the 90s, like the late 90s. And that's that when the environmental movement sort of like took off in the mid to late 90s, it was really about personal individual contribution. Like you had to recycle, you had to, not let the water run while you're brushing your teeth. But there's if you add up everything that individuals have done on an environmental scale, it's nothing compared to like a week of Nestle.
Yes.
Just
right.
operating normally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's but it's still our fault, but we can't, we have the least impact, but it's our fault. We have to do something about it.
Well, I mean, just look at the military.
Bitcoin mines too.
Look at the military. That's the point, right? The military, and think about the carbon footprint of the military and what they do every afternoon, and we couldn't even, as human beings, we couldn't even come close to what the United States military does if we want to start calling it out, but we will never call it out. Right? Because they get an exemption. They're not a part of this plan at all. Of course not. So they recently had a discussion after this Bill Gates, after this meeting, the International Energy Agency came together and started demanding these climate lockdowns and how to make this change. They recently held a discussion on climate change and how to accelerate this plan. Not surprising that they invited as their special guest one Bill Gates. And during this conference, Bill doubled down on doing something dramatic. Governments need to spend a lot of money, but we need way more than that. We need something dramatic, a world locked down. Listen to what he says.
As you just said.
Yeah, I thought that report was very important because, the IEA does such a good job of, tracking what's really going on with energy usage and then projecting out that unless something dramatic happens, both on policy and innovation, the amount of energy we'll be getting from hydrocarbons, even out in 2030, 2040, 2050, will still be very large. And so to have your group come out and say, well, to achieve these goals, here's milestones.
Yeah, here's milestones, right? So we're going to follow these milestones. And if we don't meet them, we need to keep pushing for more and more lockdowns. These are the milestones we need to reach. And the only way we're going to do that is if everyone stays home. And by the way, their 10-point plan is amazing. Don't go to work. Don't use cars on Sundays. Make sure that you stay in your local community. Don't leave outside of your local community. Don't own a car. Don't own a second car if you have multiple people in your family. Don't own a second car. Of course, I'm sure the rich people will comply with all of this. It'll just be the poor people that everyone will be in it on the same, right? We'll all be together on this.
Well, if Bill Gates, if he's on par with the United Nations goal to cut emissions by 1.5%, here's some research from Bjorn Lundberg's book, False Alarm. He says, if we are going to do that, this 1.5% goal, right, we would need to cut emissions by 7.6% every year in the 2020s, right? So during the lockdowns, we hit about 4 to 6% reduction in carbon emissions. Now, I know many of you have a problem with using carbon emissions as the metric, but the United Nations does. So let's just use it, right? So in 2020, if we only hit 4.6%, we didn't get to that 7.6% that we would need to make any impact on temperature reduction. Not only that, we'd have to do it every year. So we failed in 2020. We have to go 7.6% lower in 2021. We didn't do that. We're not going to do it in 2022. So basically, they're saying that in 2020, it should have been worse. And we need to have twice as much of an impact in 2021 and 2022, right? So even the lockdowns we already went through were not good enough. We need to have voluntarily doubled their impact, which I guess meant not ordering on Amazon, not ordering Uber Eats.
Well,
right?
doubled is one thing. He's basically calling for 10x that. So forget doubling, because that really only gets us to 16% emissions reduction is based on Bill Gates's numbers, his math that he highlights in his study.
Yeah.
Right. So we really need 10x it to get there, to get close to 100% or even 90% reduction. Right. That's what his plan is. By the way, so this speech that Bill Gates was invited to do was called a fireside chat. I just want to put this up on the screen. This was the actual name of their event. Bill Gates and a fireside chat. It's with Breakthrough Energy founder. So they called it a fireside chat. Does anyone else see the irony here in labeling this a fireside chat?
Yes.
How exactly are you going to have fire without fossil fuels or wood?
Right. Or deforestation, right? Also,
we're going to gather up around the fire and have a little fireside chat with Bill Gates.
Maybe he has one of those computerized Yule logs behind him, because he doesn't look like he's anywhere in a space.
Maybe it's a fake. It's a fake fire. It's just a fake fire with electricity. So
at least they're not calling it Putin's climate crisis.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Oh, by the way, they did today. By the way,
not calling it that yet.
Oh, geez.
In a roundabout way, we actually had who was it? I'll have it for you tomorrow in the newsletter. But an advisor for the EU said we need to keep sending weapons to Ukraine because that will lower our energy costs. Like, think about that logic for a second. She literally said that.
I don't understand that at all.
Well, then you're on the side of then you're with Putin.
Oh.
So climate activists are pushing for a total climate lockdown. Here's the mission now. You can read for yourself at climatelelockdown.com. Yes, a website admission called climatelelockdown.com. Here's their website with the hashtag protest in place. You can go to their website and watch this neat little animation here pop up. Kind of looks like I don't know what it does. And you can watch the website. You can scroll down, see protest in place, and they have a whole mantra here. So let's just read this. If you think the COVID-19 pandemic is bad, wait till you have see how climate change will hit us in the rear of the future if we do nothing now. Can you?
I think that says in the near future.
Can you take that full again? My eyes are so bad. Sorry.
I can read it.
I was trying to read it from afar, and it's like hard for me to see it across here. So let's see here. Let's see.
Hang on.
There we go. So if you think the COVID-19 pandemic is bad, wait until you see how climate change will hit us in the near future if we do nothing now. With more than half of the planet on lockdown, climate change protests across the globe have been canceled in the absence of collective action convincing policymakers of the continued need to work towards a sustainable future. Measures aimed at keeping carbon out of the atmosphere are being swiftly backed. So basically, we need to gather. We need a climate lockdown. We need a protest in place, sheltering in place. That's what we need to do as a form of protest, as a form of resistance. That's what we need to do.
Okay.
In Australia, they've gone even further. The new South Australian Labor government has declared a climate emergency. Climate lockdowns, surveillance of your carbon footprint, and restrictions on how much fuel and meat you consume might sound like conspiracy theories, they write, but the stage is being set for them to appear in the near future. So they're going to be watching every move you make. And by the way, at the World Economic Forum, we talked about carbon emissions trackers that you will all wear. They will give you these climate emissions trackers, and you'll be able to know exactly what your footprint is, according to the World Economic Forum. How many of you watching right now would comply with that? Here, John, here's your carbon emissions tracker. Put it on you.
Okay. I mean, I also want it for the bombs that we're sending, for the military bases around the world, for the naval fleet that's going in and around Taiwan. Can I get
the jets by billionaires? Like, can we track that?
Sure. I'd love to know all of that too, because my number will look pretty pitiful in comparison,
but
whatever it goes on my forehead.
Also, at the end of the day, though, can we say like that these numbers are meaningless and they're bullshit, and the United Nations created these numbers to begin with, and they're totally arbitrary and not rooted in reality, as Bjorn Lomborg writes in his book. And by the way, so I mean, we can talk about fossil fuels and why they are in many, as Alex Epstein writes in his new book called Fossil Future. It is the future, actually. And to get rid of fossil fuels is the death of a society. If you remove fossil fuels, you're literally killing people as a result. We're watching it in real time happen right now in Europe. You're seeing people having to forage for wood, and then, oh, by the way, they're being told they're not allowed to burn wood now.
Yeah.
They're being told they can't do that. So what are you going to do? Just freeze? Just put on an extra blankie. What does it mean for our health? Don't forget what lockdowns actually have done to us. Lockdowns crushed poor people. They crushed the middle class. Here's the Gray Zone writing, Flattening the Curve or Flattening the Global Poor, how COVID lockdowns obliterate human rights and crush the most vulnerable people. Or what it meant for our health, right?
Or our children. We do studies every week here on some kind of effect of lockdowns, which harmed children, harmed, all of these sort of collateral damage.
Yeah. I mean, this new study concludes lockdowns caused at least 170,000 excess deaths in the United States. The study conducted by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that there were conservatively 170,000 plus non-COVID excess deaths in the United States through 2020 and 2021.
And Dr. John Campbell just yesterday did a video on how in the UK these numbers are replicated. I think he said that they are 15% higher than previously reported.
That's not surprising at all. Because the numbers, by the way, the numbers have been conflated all along around COVID numbers. So again, now that we have these excess deaths, like what is going on here? Now we're going to start to see, as these governments they've been trying to hide this data for so long, the real numbers are going to start to come out, and it's going to be absolutely troubling. In the UK, lockdowns and children. Natalie just talked about children. Look at this. Deadly outbreak of children's hepatitis linked to the lockdown. Infants may not have been exposed to viruses because of restrictions during pandemic, says UK health chief. Hepatitis. I'm sure that's nothing to worry about. And last week, we got our first glimpse of the climate lockdown policy in action in California. This is our first real, I think, example of, forget COVID lockdowns, what climate lockdowns look like in California. It's a playbook that, as the Federalist writes, is right out of the COVID playbook. COVID response playbook is coming to an energy crisis near you. Journalist Sean Fleetwood writes at the Federalist, says, and he says a few key things here. Quoting now, he says, while barely managing to keep the lights on, the energy crisis unwittingly exposed the nation's overdependence on unreliable green energy. Much like President Joe Biden, Newsom and California Democrats have all but declared war on the fossil fuel industry and have pushed the state's residents to adopt renewable sources of energy. He then goes on to say that Democrats are pushing the language of COVID. You're noticing this over and over again, that we all need to do our part. You're going to hear that a lot.
Yes, but so many of their state residents happily parroted all of their COVID lockdown rhetoric. Like, they basically did their job for them, calling each other a-holes if they wouldn't wear a mask or stay indoors or get their vaccine or whatever, right?
Right.
So they know it's effective because their constituents, they can say, if you love the planet, get an electric car, stay the heck home, don't eat meat, eat these Beyond Burgers, right? And tell your neighbor that they're a bad person if they don't. And that worked in California.
Yeah.
People did that. They told each other they were bad people.
Right.
And policed each other. And like, so this is, if I wanted something from a state, I would do exactly this because that worked great.
So they did that in the UK. They put up billboards. It's like, if you see something, say something. If
Yeah.
you see somebody who's, out partying and all that, like Boris Johnson, call someone, tell somebody.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
This kind of goes back to those like shock treatment therapies and stuff they did back in the old days. It's like it was almost always 25% of people would stand up against it and the 75% would comply. And it's
You're
kind of like
talking about the Stanley Milgram experiment to see if people would continue to administer shocks to another person and how many people would. Yes. Yeah.
So it's like they know these percentages, and it's
they're watching people. They're like, they kept shocking their friends. They're like, yeah, they were getting pleasure out of it. And the
recipient was in on it. They were not actually getting shocked, and they would see how many people would continue to administer a really painful shock on the other subject. And when it really messed up these subjects because they were like, oh my God, I didn't think I was the kind of person who could hurt somebody. How could I have done that? And they used that to sort of say, why would people hurt other people in controlled settings, such as Nazi Germany or things like that? People think, well, if I'm in some kind of institutionalized setting, I assume that it's safe, that someone else has done the safety checks. I assume someone else is in charge and making adult decisions. So I just went along with it because I believed in some kind of higher power. Well, absolutely, David, you're right. This is at play here. People think, well, the government, is making these decisions. They're doing the research. I give them my tax money. They must know better than me. So, okay, I will wear a mask and get the vaccine and tell my neighbors that they're a jerk if they don't.
So this language.
Are you familiar with
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, are you familiar with the Stanford prison experiments as well, where they took a bunch of students, they split them into two groups, and one got to be prison guards and the other got to be prisoners. And it was like this whole thing scheduled out, and it was about 2 days before it got so out of control they had to stop the whole experiment because just like the prison guards, the students that were prison guards had just become sadistic by that point.
Yes.
And these were just like regular students.
That's unbelievable. We showed you the IRS video where they're pretending to be fake IRS agents, like at college campuses, and armed fake IRS agents. They're like, get on the ground, get on the ground. You're like, my God, they're just college students going through like a little tutorial. Like they're not actually even armed agents yet, and they're pretending because they can play this role of like having this authority. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's why propaganda is so harsh. I mean, it works. It's why they keep doing it. If it did not work, they would not keep doing it. It's just like those, Arabian Prince emails we get all the time. It's like, if they didn't work, they would stop doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this language is pretty strong. And the Democrats, he says in this piece, if we go back to the piece, the COVID response playbook coming to an energy crisis near you by Sean Fleetwood. And he says Democrats are pushing the language of COVID, that all we need to do is do our part, stay home, fight back, do our part. You're going to see this language over and over again. Fleetwood says, quote, sound familiar? It should, because the same do your part rhetoric coming from California Democrats is the same language used by politicians and health bureaucrats all over the world around COVID lockdowns as justification for orchestrating the greatest assault on Americans' freedoms in modern history. And not just Americans, of course, all over the world, from Australia to the UK to everywhere, right? To Canada, you name it. Gavin Newsom. So the question, why is Gavin Newsom creating, but it's all because it's all part of the plan. This whole thing is part of the plan. And so you see it in action with Gavin Newsom in California. Why is he creating a water and energy disaster? It's a good question. Over the past months, Gavin Newsom has quietly been starving California of power and water. Newly unearthed documents, thanks to Michael Schellenberger, show that the Newsom sandbagged plans for extra nuclear reactors at the Diablo plant. Here are the plans. Notice 6 reactors instead of 2 reactors was set to be built. Could have provided millions more with electricity. Millions. Instead, they didn't. There were supposed to be 6, but it's all part of the World Economic Forum's plans, and Newsom is a big player in it. Here's Michael Schellenberger talking about this nuclear power plant.
I'm here at Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant on the central coast of California. Nuclear power, of course, produces zero air and water pollution. Diablo Canyon sits on 3 football fields, basically a tiny patch of land that provides power for 3 million Californians. The governor, Gavin Newsom of California, he wants to shut down Diablo Canyon by 2025. It was supposed to run until the middle part of the century. He wants to shut it down early, despite the fact that we're having electricity shortages right now as we speak. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, the governor approved the burning of diesel fuel, which is our dirtiest form of energy, because 2.5 million Californians faced blackouts from energy shortages.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, they'll take it, and they don't have to have these. They have the plans in place for the water plants, the desalination plants, and so California has a man-made crisis right now of electricity, lack of water, all because of leaders, all because of leadership. There's no reason why. They have plenty of plans in place that they could have done it, and they've been sandbagged time and time again. The desalination plan, particularly by Newsom. So all part of the plan. Like, we can't pay for your electricity. Can't power your cars, keep your cars off the road, stay home, let us take control, and just shut up and be compliant. That's the plan.
All right. Well, let us know if you're planning to follow that plan. We really enjoy your responses. This is terrifying.
It's coming. I'm telling you, these climate lockdowns are coming. So be prepared for it. Like, I know it sounds maybe kind of out there, but it's absolutely coming. You're seeing it in action already.
My sister and many of you in the comments as well have been sending us information about how there's legislation to even ask people to register their home gardens so that they know what it is you've got, because they think that whatever you grow is theirs too. These are really troubling things to even consider. And maybe
are you guys going to do that? Will you guys register your gardens? Are you kidding me? Like, we're going to register your garden. Like, that's what they're going to do. I mean, we already saw what they.
I mean, when gardening becomes an act of civil disobedience, are you kidding me?
Yes.
Like, you know what? Screw you. I'm growing my own jalapenos. Like, really?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, but there have been governments in the past, the Soviet Union was one of them, that practiced collectivism, where they did actually go out and see what people were self-sustaining and take it for the government, right? This has happened. There is historical precedence for it.
For sure. I mean, yeah, there's a history of you grow this stuff and we'll just take it from you. You don't get to eat any of it. Absolutely the case.